Brené Brown has released the book Atlas of the Heart, Mapping Meaningful Connection and the Language of Human Experience. And Brené Brown is a researcher on shame and vulnerability, as well as perfectionism, and she's released plenty of books, as well as Netflix show, and even, she got known for her TED Talk on vulnerability. And I thought that since she's now released this book, I'd open it up to the section where she talks about perfectionism, because here at Bloom Beyond, what we do is that we help you create a life and business of freedom from perfectionism with the power of the subconscious mind, right? And you're more than welcome to apply to join the Bloom Beyond tribe for Sunflowers and Bloomers to come in, and we can then actually help you out and support you in overcoming perfectionism, right? You can go to bloombeyond.com/apply for that. That's just a side note, right? But anyways, she's talking about perfectionism in this book. I grabbed myself a cup of matcha latte here. Amazing, amazing. Get yourself something to drink too, because I thought we could just, read through here what it says about perfectionism. And with my own personal experience on perfectionism, and also having coached plenty of high performers with perfectionism, just wanted to see what it says here, and we can draw upon it together and continue the conversation also in the comments, right? What it is that you think about it. So what it says here is perfectionism. And perfectionism is basically under the chapter, places we go when we fall short. Shame, self-compassion, perfectionism, guilt, humiliation, embarrassment. That's what's covered in this one, in this chapter right here. So when it comes to perfectionism, it says, shame is the birthplace of perfectionism. Perfectionism is not striving to be our best or working toward excellence. Healthy striving is internally driven. Perfectionism is externally driven by a simple but potentially all-consuming question: what will people think? Now, this makes sense to me that shame is the birthplace of perfectionism, because when you think about it, with perfectionism, you have an ideal in your mind, right? And you have excessively high standards. And whenever you don't reach up to those standards, or others don't reach up to those standards, that can actually create shame, right? It's like you feel shame for oftentimes not performing as well as you'd like, not behaving as you'd like, not doing this and this and this as you'd like, right? So shame is the birthplace of perfectionism. And it oftentimes is centered around, several or a few different experiences in the past, especially when your subconscious mind was most suggestible when you were, a kid, where you got shamed for doing or not doing certain things, and then your coping mechanism ended up being perfectionism to cope with that. And so you began to believe that your worth is tied in with your performance and what you do and how you look and appearance and all of that kind of jazz. And there you go. You have a great little soup there with perfectionism and shame. So it says here, what will people think? That is the consuming question, right? Now that suggests to me that we're talking about socially prescribed perfectionism. Self-oriented perfectionism is where you think to yourself, what will I think if I don't do X, Y, and Z, right? Other-oriented perfectionism would be more so centered around, projecting your own standards onto others, whilst socially prescribed perfectionism is what will people think? What will others think? Now, it continues to then say here, it may seem counterintuitive, but one of the biggest barriers to working toward mastery is perfectionism. That is so true. That is so true. And that is exactly why when you're to create anything, when you're to, create a business for yourself, when you're to step out there and take a risk, when you're to have a conversation that is, less than comfortable, then, it is necessary to overcome perfectionism to do so. Absolutely is, because it is a big barrier toward mastery. It says here, in our leadership research, we've learned that achieving mastery requires curiosity and viewing mistakes and failures as opportunities for learning. Perfectionism kills curiosity by telling us that we have to know everything or we risk looking less than. Perfectionism tells us that our mistakes and failures are personal defects. So we either avoid trying new things or we barely recover every time we inevitably fall short. So there's a couple of things that I want to touch upon there, especially with regards to curiosity and, viewing mistakes and failures as opportunities for learning, right? Because here's the thing. When you're stuck in perfectionism, right, you simply cannot be curious at the same time. It's close to impossible, right? Being able to be curious about what you can actually learn from anything at all, that is what is necessary to grow. And with perfectionism, just like Brené Brown says here, perfectionism kills curiosity. It truly kills curiosity. And you're kind of consumed by this idea of well, if I let myself be curious and do something, then I fail or I make a mistake or whatever, what will happen then? I will be less than. It will say something about me. And so you're then not able to see that your performance and your sense of play, you're not able to see that is separate from your worth. You are always worthy, right? But you don't see that when you have perfectionism. So that's what it says there. So kind of a learning you can take away from that is to simply allow yourself to be playful, to tap into that sense of curiosity. What are you curious about really, right? What are you curious about? Not necessarily what is it that you like, but what are you curious about? Because everything begins with curiosity. And sometimes when you're to master anything, master something, create something, it all begins with you being curious about something and then following that nudge, trusting that nudge, that intuition that is guiding you there, and then allowing yourself to try and fail. You have no idea how many times that I've tried and failed on different things, right? As a creative, as a photographer, as a coach, as a cat mom, as a partner, as a friend. Constant curiosity is necessary. Being curious about growth too, Understanding that growth is something that is developing, is growing. When you allow yourself to play, when you allow yourself to make mistakes. Furthermore, it says here, papers by Paul Hewitt and colleagues and Simon Sherry and colleagues provide evidence that people with high levels of perfectionistic traits are doomed to fail at meeting their own expectations and the expectations that they assume are held by others. Perceive themselves as consistently falling short of others' expectations, behave in ways that result in perceived and actual exclusion and rejection by others, feel socially disconnected and have fewer social connections. Yeah. It's interesting how she mentions this study and everything too. I know from my own research on this as well, of reading through these research articles and everything, that, socially prescribed perfectionism is on the rise, right? If you compare self-oriented perfectionism, other-oriented perfectionism, and socially prescribed perfectionism, socially prescribed perfectionism is at 3 times the rate more prevalent now than the other two. And it is because we're more concerned about basically what other people think. Also because because of neoliberalism, kind of have created this importance of building our own personal image, and our sense of worth seem to be intertwined with our performance and the appearance that we create, right? Which makes sense with social media and everything. So it makes sense to me that this is what they define perfectionism as, for sure. And it also makes sense to me that a lot of perfectionists or high performers with perfectionism feel disconnected and have fewer social connections. Because when you have perfectionism, you oftentimes, you feel like you should do everything on your own, right? In order to maintain your high standards, you feel like you're the only one that can make things happen. So you rarely delegate, you rarely automate, you rarely get support or ask for support because you find a lot of importance and value in doing things yourself. Oftentimes, a lot of high performers with perfectionism also felt very lonely as children. Doesn't have to be, but very often that is the case. You might have taken on a lot of responsibility when you were younger, also now maybe. And so you got a lot of value from doing things on your own, right? And so obviously then you're gonna cut yourself off from any kind of connection whatsoever, or help or support, because how are you gonna get value from that? How are you gonna be valuable when you allow yourself to be supported? Now, in the Bloom-Bound Perfectionism program, for instance, we actually have a huge emphasis on creating what I call mycorrhizal networks. Just like a sunflower or a tree, the trees create these networks beneath the ground to feel rooted with other trees and plants and all that kind of stuff, to be able to exchange nutrients and feel supported and grounded. We need that too. You need that too. We need that. It's necessary. But the only way that you can create authentic connection is through you first getting to know your soil, your values, right? Who it is that you are, what it is that you stand for, beneath all the layers of the perfectionism. That's what we cover in the root season of the Bloom-Bound Perfectionism program. We have the wilt, fall, root, rise, bloom seasons that we kind of grow through. But it's absolutely essential to firstly get to know thyself, right? Before you begin creating these, mycorrhizal networks and everything to experience greater connection. So that was that. Then it says here, I write a lot about perfectionism across my books. Yeah, she does. It's a healthy dose of research or heal thyself. I often call myself a recovering perfectionist and an aspiring good enoughness. Make sense? I hear that a lot too. In The Gifts of Imperfection, I explain how perfectionism emerged from our research. The definition that best fit the data is that perfectionism is a self-destructive and addictive belief system that fuels this primary thought. If I look perfect, live perfectly, work perfectly, and do everything perfectly, I can avoid or minimize the painful feelings of shame, judgment, and blame. Absolutely. And that's why I typically like to say that when you're to overcome perfectionism, what it's all about is you learning to become more and more comfortable, or at least less uncomfortable, with these painful feelings, right, of shame, judgment, and blame. And being able to actually allow yourself to look a little less perfectly, live a little less perfectly, and work a little less perfectly, and do everything a little less perfectly. But here's the thing, I think that it has a lot to do with the feelings of needing to feel perfect. To be able to overcome perfectionism, you get to allow yourself to no longer, have to feel that perfect. Who cares? Like, who cares, right? But it's easy to say when you've overcome perfectionism. But when you're in it, it's disastrous because your worth is intertwined with your appearance, with what you do, with what you create, right? So it is a practice. It is a practice. It also says here, perfectionism is not self-improvement. Perfectionism is, at its core, about trying to earn approval and acceptance. Most perfectionists were raised by being praised for achievement and performance. Good grades, good manners, nice appearance, sports prowess, I've never heard of that word before, rule following, people pleasing. Yes, yes, yes. Somewhere along the way, we adopt this dangerous and debilitating belief system, I am what I accomplish and how well I accomplish it. Please perform. Healthy striving is self-focused. How can I improve? Perfectionism is other-focused. What will they think? See? What I take away from this and what makes sense is that, again, most perfectionists were raised being praised for achievement and performance. This is very common, and that's also why perfectionism is on the rise, because a lot of the parenting style these days is centered around just that. And also because, parents typically also may have some perfectionistic tendencies. They project that onto their children, oftentimes without awareness. Makes total sense. It doesn't have to be like that, but sometimes that is the case. Other times, the parents might not have perfectionistic tendencies, but might either, be sick or unwell or unable to be emotionally responsive, be avoidant, be anxious, right? And that creates a gap for you as the child to, fill the gap and be the one who solves everything and steps up. That was the case for me, for instance, where I kind of stepped up when people didn't, right? Or my caregivers didn't to the extent that I, probably would have needed to have safe attachments and everything. So that's oftentimes how it can develop, and makes total sense. It also says here, understanding the difference between healthy striving and perfectionism is critical to laying down the shield and picking up your life. I love that. Research shows that perfectionism hampers success. In fact, it often sets you on the path to depression, anxiety, addiction, and life paralysis. Life paralysis refers to all the opportunities we miss because we're too afraid to put anything out in the world that would be imperfect. It's also all of the dreams that we don't follow because of our deep fear of failing, making mistakes, and disappointing others. It's terrifying to risk when you're a perfectionist. Your self-worth is on the line, right? I love the fact that she talks about life paralysis because that is oftentimes what happens with high performers with perfectionism, that you get some sort of like a life paralysis, like because you've waited so long, oftentimes in procrastination, and had a lot of resistance to doing something because you had an ideal about how it was supposed to or should be done. you get into this life paralysis of like, well, can't do anything then, right? Like, because there's so much pressure, you get paralyzed, right? You get into freeze mode or fawn mode where you start pleasing others because that is easier, right? Than being in contact and in touch and in connection with yourself and what you want to do and what your dreams are, right? So you oftentimes can get into life paralysis. As previously mentioned, perfectionism is a self-destructive and addictive belief system that we use to protect ourselves from feelings of shame, judgment, and blame. It's a 20-ton shield that we lug around thinking it will protect us, when in fact, it's the thing that really is preventing us from taking flight. Let me explain why I describe perfectionism as both being self-destructive and addictive. Yeah, just wanted to touch upon that too, how yes, perfectionism is shield, right? It's an armor. You armor up, basically. You armor up because the fear of being vulnerable is so strong. It's better to just armor up and kind of feel like you protect yourself than to risk failure, risk mistakes, risk being torn apart for being you, right? Because that would mean that you would be unworthy. See? Perfectionism is a self-destructive thing simply because there is no such thing as perfection. Perfection is an unattainable goal. Additionally, perfectionism is more about perception. We want to be perceived as perfect. Again, this is unattainable. There is no way to control perception regardless of how much time and energy we spend trying. And my thoughts on this is that yes, for sure, it's more about perception and it's more about the feeling, right? But again, not every single high performer with perfectionism is concerned about what other people think about you, right? It's not always like that. Could be like that. Self-oriented perfectionism is more so about you imposing these standards on yourself, being concerned about what you think about yourself more than others think about yourself. And so other people might not understand you and you might feel lonely in that. But still, it's very much about your perception about yourself and that you don't feel like you kind of raise up to the standards, right? So yeah, it's all about being able to surrender this kind of perception and realizing that you're not able to control anyone's perception of you. And with your own perception, it's becoming more comfortable with being able to perceive yourself as you are, regardless of how well you do or don't do. And seeing too that there is no such thing as doing something right or wrong. That is dualistic. It's not like that, right? It's about the shades of gray in between, the colors in between. Right and wrong is something that you get to surrender when you overcome perfectionism. And you can begin to practice that now by seeing that, what if there's no right or wrong? What if there's something in between there that I'm missing, that I can start to tune into? That maybe I get to grow, I get to learn in the kind of space in between there. Perfectionism is addictive because when we invariably do experience shame, judgment, and blame, we often believe it's because we weren't perfect enough. So rather than questioning the faulty logic of perfectionism, we become even more entrenched in our quest to live, look, and do everything just right. And yes, perfectionism is addictive in the way that also it's subconscious. So the more and more and more you invest of yourself into continuing to maintain the armor, continuing to maintain these standards, continuing to maintain things being a certain way and you having to feel a certain way, right? The more you get addicted to it. you begin to maintain it, and it becomes this vicious, self-fulfilling cycle of having perfectionistic thinking, then having perfectionistic behavior, and it going all the way back around, right? Over and over and over again. Feeling ashamed or feeling shamed, judged, and blamed, and the fear of these feelings are realities of the human experience. Perfectionism actually increases the odds that we'll experience these painful emotions and often leads to self-blame. It's my fault. I'm feeling this way because I'm not good enough. Yeah? Absolutely. Absolutely. So this is the book, right? Atlas of the Heart, Mapping Meaningful Connection in the Language of Human Experience. And that was what it said about perfectionism. All of this makes sense to me. I can see that Brené Brown's basically kind of taken lots of snippets from all of her books with about perfectionism here and there and brought it together into the definition of what it is or whatever. I feel like to some extent, the way that she describes it is very much socially prescribed perfectionism, being considerate or thinking a lot about what other people think, right? When in fact with a lot of perfectionism, and with you too maybe, it's more so maybe about what you think about yourself, and that you have a lot of high unrealistic standards for yourself, right? And that is self-oriented perfectionism. So she's probably not put a lot of emphasis on that, but more so the socially prescribed aspect of it. And it makes sense to me because that is what is spreading now more and more. And so that is exactly what we're helping you with, right, in the Bloom Beyond tribe. So go to bloombeyond.com/apply to join that tribe. I'm then also obviously decoding plenty of her quotes and everything, and helping you better understand perfectionism as well as overcoming it, being able to create a life and business of freedom from perfectionism for yourself, being able to also rewire your subconscious mind too, because it's easy to say, oh, I'm just gonna, force myself using my rational mind to overcome perfectionism, when in fact, it's deeply subconscious. It's a pattern of thinking and being. It's addictive, like Brené Brown said. And so being able to break that addiction, that is what we can help you with and support you with, right? And obviously, it's a 256 members limit in this group, this tribe. We have monthly cohorts, so make sure to apply, but be aware that there is waiting time to also come in and receive support and help. And from there onwards, you can join our paid programs to actually truly deal with it and have a tremendous identity shift from being a perfectionist to being what it is that you truly are within, which is a sunflower in a bloomer who is bright, brave, and balanced. So that's that. I just wanted to bring you along on that little reading session right there. I'm going to enjoy my matcha now in full, and stay bright, brave, and balanced, and I'll see you next time.